Welcome to Strategic Edge, a podcast by leaders and for leaders. We're here to inform, instruct, and inspire leaders. We're going to share information about business models, about theories, but then we're also going to provide instructions. How do you apply those? How do you make them very practical? And finally, we're going to encourage you to act. My name is Ted Davis. I'll be your podcast host and your leadership coach. I have been a practitioner, a student, and a teacher of leadership now for nearly 60 years. And as my future guests and I inform, instruct, and inspire you, I encourage you to do three things. First of all, absorb what we share with you. Make it your own. Take it on. Take notes. Make it your own thoughts. Make it part of what you now believe about leadership. Number two, reflect on it. What does it mean to you? What do we affirm that you're already doing? What ideas do you pick up about how to improve? And then thirdly, we want you to commit to an action plan so you can continue to move forward. So we want you to absorb, reflect, and commit. And with that, let's start today's podcast. Good evening. I want to welcome today's guest is Lee Van Arsdale. And I am absolutely thrilled to introduce you to Lee. Lee is a West Point classmate of mine. So that means he's as old as I am, and we're both old men. You can see by the gray hairs in our mustaches and beards. And we both know that because our bodies have fallen apart after carrying rucksacks and walking plenty of miles. Lee and I were both infantrymen when we were young Army officers. Lee continued and did all the great infantry jobs that we have, commanding at all levels, but he also was in special forces. He did a lot of wonderful things serving the country in special forces. Retired in early 2000s, and then was chief executive officer for two companies. One was Triple Canopy, a security company, and then the second one, Creative Radicals, which was a software company. So I am thrilled to welcome Lee. Thanks for joining me this evening. Did I catch everything that you wanted me to say about your introduction?
Yeah, that's more than I would have said, but I've already told you that you're a guy I can't say no to. So when you ask me if I would do this, the answer was an easy yes.
Well, I'd say two other things. You can see by the background in his studio or his office, he's an outdoorsman, lives in Colorado, and a lot of activity there. And the great thing about Lee is our class at West Point voted him a distinguished graduate, which is pretty high honor there at the academy. So I'm just so proud that he represents our class, and now he's here this evening to talk about leadership. So Lee, you've led in both the military and in business. You've been highly successful. You're at the pinnacle of being a leader. What's been your guiding star, the model, whatever shaped you as the guidance, the anchor, if you will, or just kind of shaped your leadership philosophy?
So I don't know if there's a name for it, but I'll give it a name. It's the golden rule model. I treat people the way I want to be treated. It's pretty fundamental. We learned it at a very young age. But, in my life, I've encountered some leaders that they make it hard to look up to. And when your time with them is through, you say, okay, it wasn't all negative because now I know what not to do. But my time in the Army, I had, in 25 years, I had three bad leaders, and all of them were for not very long. So that means all the rest of them were good leaders, good, sound soldiers, in many cases, solid Christians, and I can't say enough good about them. So every leader we have, good or bad, we learn from them. And I'm always careful about the term lessons learned because people talk about it like it's automatic. No, you have to learn the lesson. You can't just say, okay, there's an experience. No, I'll put it in the lessons learned category. You have to actively learn and apply those lessons. So a long-winded answer to an easy question. Everything I do is based on treat people the way I would like to be treated.
Well, it's a marvelous philosophy, and I really appreciate the fact that, like me, you learned it from a lot of good leaders. And I would echo what you said about our experiences in the Army. I had far more good leaders who taught me, wonderful lessons about being a leader, about being a soldier, and then later in business career for the last 26, 27 years. A lot of the leaders I've come across, I've been very blessed. A lot of
Uh,
good ones and very
I'm
few that.
sure you're like me. When I refer to Army leaders, I'm just not just talking about my superiors. Most of my leaders were the NCOs that
Oh,
ostensibly worked for me, but I learned so much from them.
oh, that is so true. And I think that's a great teaching point in leadership, that you better be prepared to learn from, quote, your subordinates, particularly when they're very seasoned. Fortunately, I'm not sure who it was, but early in, as a young lieutenant about to go take a platoon, somebody must have whispered it in my ear, or maybe they said it loudly, you know, hey, you better be prepared to learn from your platoon sergeant. And I had one of the best when I started off, and guy by the name of Dankert, and so thankful for him. I agree. Our NCOs are marvelous trainers of officers, really.
Yeah. Well, that's one of their responsibilities, and they take it seriously, and they do a heck of a good job.
No, they absolutely do. Now, one of the things, as we talked before we came on air, as I was thinking about various topics that I've been teaching on and teaching leaderships, is the Steve Jim Collins model, 5 levels of leadership. In his fifth level of leadership, and he talks about fifth level 5 leader has the paradoxical blend of humility and strong will. And I just love that definition. Paradoxical. It doesn't sound like it goes together, but I think, as you and I know, that is, I think that to be a great leader, those two things are got to be present, and they're almost inseparable. You got to have both humility and strong will. And so, as I was contemplating it, you came to mind, and that's why I wanted to chat with you today.
Well, as I told you, I find it humbling, and I'm not being ironic that you would think of me. I don't find it paradoxical. I mean, I know you're a Christian. 2,000 years ago, a man gave us that model of being strong will and humble. That, of course, being Jesus. And I think a lot of people may have the concept that to be a good leader, you have to be an aggressive self-server. But I'm with Collins. I think humility is an important aspect of being a successful leader. And by just as a quick aside, he wrote a really interesting article on West Point not too long ago. I don't know if you read that.
No, I did not.
Yeah, the basic thesis was he was amazed at how the cadets are all in an extremely competitive environment, but they all help each other.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think we learned that from day one, that you were only going to survive by working with one another. It was almost the hard lesson that old Richard Gere movie was, Officer and a Gentleman,
Yeah.
where he was going through the naval officer candidate school, and it was all about him. And that was the hard lesson he had learned through that movie, was no, it's not all about you. You've got to take care of your teammates and depend on them, and how he came about that. How did that play out for you in both your military career and then in business? That's taking care of one another and blending that model.
Well, so I was raised, and I played a lot of team sports as a child, so that just becomes part of your DNA. You take care of each other, and then when you're in a leadership position, whether it's in the Army or the business world or the charity world, to me, it's expected to take care of whoever their charges are. That's part of the job. And so when you see a self-serving leader, hopefully that's the exception to the rule.
Absolutely. Well, I think in our first profession, one of the role models that most people be familiar with, but I think comes to mind, is General Colin Powell, uh, former Chief of Staff of the Army and then Secretary of State in the Bush administration.
Yeah,
Fortunately,
chairman of the Joint
he
Chiefs.
died. He was, to me, I never worked for him, but he seemed to be the epitome of a humble but yet strong-willed leader.
Yeah, he's the picture of an officer and a gentleman,
Absolutely.
harkening back to your movie. I had the opportunity to meet him once when he was the chairman in his office. And that story is too long for your podcast, but hopefully we'll see each other face to face one of these days. Remind me to tell you that story. It's a great one. And it underscores his humility, his sense of humor. I can't say enough good about the man.
Yeah, the fascinating thing I find about some of the senior officers that we either worked under or were around, it amazes me how many times you're sharing stories like we are, and a name will come up, and they'll say, "Oh, great guy or bad guy." And every time I've ever heard someone speak General Powell's name, it was always favorable. People who worked for him would rave about him and just couldn't say enough positive things on how much they learned and how much they appreciated him. There was another four-star about that same era. I'm not going to mention his name, but every time I heard his name, oh my gosh, it was nothing but vitriol. People just despised him because he was all self-centered. It was always about him and making him, and he abused people. The number of people he absolutely squashed was disappointing.
I bet I know who you're talking about, so I won't ask you. But it is disappointing that individuals like that can raise to the four-star level.
Yeah, it is.
Um, Sometimes the Army rewards leading up much better than it does leading down.
Yeah. And unfortunately, we had far more good ones than not, but there are a few
Sure.
that get to it. So that's absolutely wonderful. What are you doing in your old age now? We're both old men. What are you doing to continue to train and develop leaders?
Well, I'm spending a lot of time making up for all the hunting I couldn't do when I was a soldier. So I went out pheasant hunting yesterday in 20-degree weather with a strong wind, and my dogs loved it. We had a good day. But I'm on several boards. I'm working with, at last count, 6 different companies.
Wow.
And they asked me to be on their boards so I can help, not just the typical board stuff of providing oversight, ensuring good governance, but also to help with the strategic direction because I have had some experience in that realm. And I enjoy doing board work. It's not like you just took on a COO job. That's full time and a half. Board work, you have to make a total commitment to the company once you accept that position. You're committed to their success, but it's not full time. It's not the demanding role that a CEO or a COO is. And I'm also doing some charity work for a couple of different veteran organizations. Somehow I had the bright idea to run a fundraiser for one of the funds I'm involved with. And I am missing that gene. I've never done any fundraising. I don't know the first thing about it, but I do know how to put together a good team. So because of that team, we've been very successful for a really good fund.
That is awesome. Tell me a little bit about how you form teams. You say you put a lot together. I'd be interested. What's your kind of technique to pull people together and give them a shared vision and kind of move forward?
Yeah, in some cases, it's been someone I've worked with before, and I say, oh, Ted would be ideal for this spot. And then invariably Ted says, no, I don't want to do that. So, I never take no for an answer the first time. Maybe after 12 or so times, I'll say, he might actually mean it. So you always got to have a plan B. But the part of the aspect is working with people I've known. And then usually you come into a situation that has leaders in place. So then it's a matter of keeping the good one in place and finding someplace else for the not so good one to go make a living. And it takes a while for that team to form together and gel and operate as a team. But as you well know, once the team is running on all cylinders, it's a thing of beauty to behold.
Oh, it truly is. A well-oiled team is absolutely phenomenal. Obviously, we saw a lot of them being on active duty, but when we're both former athletes, or I refer to myself as an out of shape football lineman, and I have been a lifelong New York Yankees fan. No other sport do I have a one team that I've known my whole life, but the Yankees. Ever since I've been a kid, I grew up in Binghamton, New York, and learned to be a Yankees fan. Always have been, and one of the eras where they were incredibly successful in the late 1990s, and they won 3 World Series in a row. And it was amazing listening to them to talk because they all said, "Hey, we're a no-name, champions," because they all saw themselves as kind of peers, and there was nobody that was kind of out in front of them, and they were just absolutely in sync. They respected each other. They played well. They kept each other accountable. But I thought that was absolutely marvelous. That I kind of had that attitude. Whereas earlier in the Yankees' career, they had Reggie Jackson, who was a phenomenal player, Mr. October. But man, all the dissension on that team because of the personalities.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think you and I agree that a cohesive team, I think that absolutely goes back to a cohesive team will have humble, strong-willed people. You're going to come together, you're going to listen to one another, you're going to believe in first the organization and its mission, but then you're going to believe in one another and develop that esprit. So you're absolutely a give and take, and you respect each other, and you can have robust debate. I like Patrick Lencioni's model in his what is it? His second book, I think it was Five Dysfunctions of a Team, and how he's talked about trust being the foundation of a good team. So, how did you go about building trust with your team?
Boy, that's one of those questions you can spend all day answering and never really give a proper answer. I think the first thing is you got to walk the walk. There's a lot of good talkers out there, but when you're in a leadership position, eyes are always on you, not just your subordinates, but your peers and your superiors. Everyone is always, is he going to make a good call? Is he going to be a good leader, especially when you're new in the job? So you have to understand that, and you have to walk the walk. If you're not willing to do that, then you should go find another line of work. I can't say my level of disapproval for someone who, at the end of the workday, they think they've quit being a leader, and then they go out and do things different from what they espouse in the workplace. So, that's being hypocritical. You got to walk the walk 24/7.
Absolutely.
And once you come in and take over as a leader, you have to tell what your leadership philosophy is and what your expectations are, and get that done right. The first thing you do, so that everyone knows what to expect. But then, that's the easy part. Then the tough part is enforcing that all the time. You can't make exceptions. Well, Ted's my buddy, we've known each other a long time. Yeah, he did something wrong, but I'm going to overlook it. And then, Joe Smith, the thing, he's out of here. No, you got to be consistent, and that's part of that foundation of trust. People have to trust that you're not a hypocrite and that you're going to be consistent, and that when you say something, you mean it, and when you set a standard, you're going to enforce it.
I
People
couldn't agree.
people like to be held accountable. They like to be given the responsibility. You have to have accountability, responsibility, and authority, all three. You can't give someone one or two out of three and then expect them to succeed. They won't. So that's part of building trust, is you have to give them those three items. And yeah, I'm missing the micromanager gene. I think if you have a micromanager, then one of you is superfluous. So you have to empower down and trust your people. Trust is a two-way street. So, for them to trust you, you have to trust them.
Yeah. Well, I like that triad: accountability, authority, and responsibility. And one of the things I add to it when I'm training leaders is that when you give them responsibility, you've got to give them authority that's commensurate with that responsibility. You can't give them little or no authority and expect them to do great things. The level of authority they have to deal with their people, to spend money, to make decisions has got to be commensurate with it. And then the third element, the accountability. Too many people look at that, hear that word, and they cringe because accountability's been a negative. They always get beat up. And what I try to emphasize is that no, accountability has got to be a positive. That I really like being accountable to Lee because And I go to Lee and I'm telling him what I'm doing. If I have a problem, it's a safe place to say I'm having a problem and I need resources or I need whatever. But making accountability a safe thing rather than a painful thing, like you're playing whack-a-mole. It's so important to have. I love your trilogy. Thank you for bringing that up. So it's accountability, responsibility, and authority. That's great. Any other magic formulas you have besides that one?
I don't live by formulas. I came very close to because of calculus. So I don't live by formulae, but those kind of things to me are fundamental. And you're right. A lot of people view accountability as a negative, but the really good people, they welcome it. They know that, I'm proud of what I've done, so I want to be held accountable for it.
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. Well, I've taken up a considerable amount of your time this evening, and I deeply appreciate your coming on. I wish we could spend the whole day together, but I know our listeners have got some other things to be doing. So, as we wrap up, I always ask my guests, what are three things people can do? Our listeners is they're going to take hopefully what we talked about and make it practical, live out some of these things. So, what are three practical things that you could do? When I asked you ahead of time, just to refresh your memory, one, and you can expound on these, you said, make every decision and take every action on a foundation of integrity and trust. Speak a little bit more about that one.
I think it's pretty self-explanatory. I talked about walking the walk and don't be a hypocrite. All that's based on that foundation, integrity and trust. And those concepts have to be two-way streets.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that word foundation is so important, because a foundation, it gives you stability. Without the stability of integrity and trust, it's just not going to happen. Well, the second thing you wrote was that your recommendation is the practical thing is lead from the front. When you say that, what exactly does it mean to lead from the front?
Yeah. So, as a soldier, that's, really part of what we do. We lead from the front. It's follow me, do what I do. But I think a better term, and I hate to say this, but I got this from an Air Force fighter pilot, is lead from the decisive point. Because the
Wow.
fact is, it's not always practical to be from the front. It's not always practical to say, follow me, do what I do. Now, having said that, everyone that you're leading needs to know that you're willing to do that. We learned early on there, and never tell your soldiers to do something you're not willing to do yourself. That doesn't mean you're in a position where you can go do it all the time. So leading from the front is both literally and figuratively the way I think you have to lead. So literally, follow me, do what I do. Figuratively, lead from the decisive point. Sometimes that may be from the boardroom. Sometimes it may be out on the manufacturing floor. Sometimes it may be getting two or three of your most trusted colleagues together and say, okay, we've got this problem. It's up to us to fix it, and we have to fix it right now. So there's any number of decisive points. Right now, your highest and best decisive point is behind that microphone, providing this podcast to people. So it's kind of a tough concept for people to come to grips with until they just close their eyes and imagine, okay, any given day in my job, where's my best decisive point? In other words, where can I best influence the action to achieve a successful result? So when I say lead from the front, that's what I mean.
That is perfect. I love that. I put that at the top almost. Lead from the decisive point. Well, what a wonderful way to say it. I love the way these short phrases oftentimes have powerful meaning, and that's one of them. So, and then the third point you were making is don't shy away from planning. It really does make a difference.
Yeah, this is one of those subjects like trust I could talk a lot about. I've seen organizations that don't plan and people who don't know how to or don't want to. They always misquote, I think it was Baron von Schlieffen or maybe it was Count or whoever, part of the German general staff before World War One. No plan survives first contact with the enemy. And that's a paraphrase, but it's also, he went on to say something to the effect of, that's why it's important to have a good strategy in place.
Yeah.
But the people who don't want to plan conveniently leave that part out. So, I've had people tell me, well, the nature of our business doesn't really lend itself to planning. And that may be, they know their business better than I do, but I will tell you that every business has a budget. And if you don't plan properly for that, then you're going to have a rough year ahead of you. So if you go through the what if drills of, okay, what if we exceed our revenue projections by 10%? What do we do? Because as soon as you do that, people are going to say, oh, I need to hire 3 new people. No, my hires are more important than yours. And I need to buy this new machinery. So, it's a good discussion to have, but if you plan beforehand, and the flip side of that coin is, what if we don't make our revenue projections? What do we do? You don't want to be in that position, say, okay, are we going to lay people off? And if so, who? Are we not going to make the planned expansion? Are we not going to get improvements? If you do all that beforehand and you get everyone to buy in, then it makes those discussions a lot easier down the road. And everyone can fit that budget planning into their brain. I would say the same thing applies to the strategic planning for the company.
Absolutely.
If you don't know where you're going, it's pretty hard to know when you get there.
Absolutely. I think that's an incredibly important part about planning. And when I've been training leaders, I really emphasize written plans. And a lot of people say, well, put them on the shelf and they collect dust. Well, it's because you're not using it. And you got to get it out, and it's got to have, action plans that define who's going to be accountable for what. And then what are the measures of success? What are the key performance indicators? I had a leader, probably 20 years ago now. He was talking about the planning process. And he admitted that, he'd done some strategic planning, and then he didn't go back and look at the plan until like 3 years later. When he pulled out his plan, he found that he'd actually accomplished everything that was in it, even though he didn't go back and look at it. And he said, now that's probably wasn't very smart. I should have been looking at it. But the takeaway was, because he had taken the time, written it out, thought about it. Yes, it's good to have it in writing, but it was also right here, and it was in his memory, and he kept working at it. So I think you still got to refer to your documents, but
what I advocate is formally scheduling a quarterly review
yes
of your strategic plan to include the annual operating plan and the budget. That way you can make small adjustments, not get to the end of the year and be facing some major adjustments.
Absolutely. Good quarterly business review is absolutely vital. So Lee, thank you. I just love those. Make every decision and take every action on the foundation of integrity and trust. Lead from the front, and then you lead it from the decisive point. And don't shy away from planning. It really does make the difference. So the 3 practical steps, I hope our listeners will have written those down. If not, they can come and download them on our website with the podcast notes we'll have. Lee, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this, and it's always good to see classmates and old friends together. So thank you so much.
My pleasure, Ted. Great seeing you too, buddy.
Now I've got 3 ideas of what to share from today's podcast. So again, what I'd like for you to be able to do is take those ideas, make them your own, reflect on them. What do they mean to you? And then thirdly, commit to an action plan. Commit to actions that you can take to apply what we've talked about today. If you want help, if you want some ideas, if you want some accountability, please contact me. Contact me by sending me a text, 913-306-1499. Put podcast follow-up in the text message, and I'll get back to you within 24 hours. Thank you so much for listening today, and I'll see you on our next broadcast.